Greetings, salutations, respect, and love. I am Scott. You're in the Prog Corner, and I don't know where my hat is. As you can tell, it's probably about time for a haircut. I don't know. But today, we're celebrating a very special birthday. One of my favorite albums of all time turns 50 on Thursday. Yeah, you know what we're talking about. We're talking about the mighty Larks Tongues In Aspic, the fifth album from King Crimson. And why do I love this album so much? Why do I consider it to be the absolute peak of what King Crimson ever did? Well, there's a lot of competition for best King Crimson album, and The Court of the Crimson King obviously comes to mind. Red is a personal favorite, and Discipline obviously pointed the band in a whole new direction and really gave their career a jump start in the 80s. But I always go back to this one. This was actually the second King Crimson album I ever bought. I did have In the Court of the Crimson King, and I liked it. I really loved 21st Century Schizoid Man, but some of the other tracks I didn't love as much. This one here, man, when Bill Bruford left Yes and joined King Crimson, I, of course, was very curious to see what he would bring to King Crimson. And when I bought this album, I was scared to death. It does scare me a lot. This really goes pretty far away from traditional rock music. There's very little in terms of traditional song structure. There aren't a lot of choruses. You know, you don't get a verse, a chorus, and a middle eight. This thing's just nuts. There's a lot of improv on there. There's a lot of Eastern European classicism. Bela Bartok was always a big influence on Robert Fripp. But why do I love this album so much? Well, dude, it's the songs, man. You know, every one of those albums that I mentioned as potential rivals to Larks Tongues In Aspic for best King Crimson album had a blemish, man. That first album, In the Court of the Crimson King, had Moonchild. It goes on way too long. Red has Providence. That goes on way too long. Even Starless and Bible Black had Providence, just not great. Too much of the improv. The improv stuff on this album is all baked into songs that have actual structure. Larks Tongues In Aspic Part 1 in particular is really, really wild. And it just scared me to death when the violin starts going up from David Cross and the tension just builds and then it explodes. I just didn't, oh man, I love this album. After Larks Tongues In Aspic 1, you've got that shorter track, Book of Saturday, which is nice. I guess we'll mention Richard Palmer James. He's the guy that wrote all the lyrics on this album. He was a founding member of Supertramp and wrote all the lyrics on the first Supertramp album. He writes all the lyrics here because, well, Robert Fripp had fired his whole band, man. He fired Pete Sinfield and he fired Mel Collins. Well, I guess Mel Collins was invited back into the band, but he decided he was going to do some other things. So Robert Fripp wanted to have, you know, that extra instrumentation, that extra soloist, if you will, and David Cross's violin fit in perfect. Yeah, after Greg Lake, we went through, you know, a couple of singers that just weren't great in King Crimson history, but we landed on John Wetton here. Apparently, he had asked Robert Fripp to join the band a couple of times, but ended up with family. This guy was all over the place, was friends with the band. Guess he was friends with Richard Palmer James, which is how he came about writing the lyrics. And then you've got Bill Bruford, who left Yes after the Close to the Edge recording was done. And this five-piece King Crimson lineup was completed by Jamie Muir, the guy who gave John Anderson the autobiography of a yogi, which inspired Tales from Topographic Oceans. This album has that five-man lineup. It's absolutely perfect. It's the only album that had that lineup because Jamie left the band after this. And then David Cross left the band after Starless and Bible Black. This album is perfect. Yeah, after Book of Saturdays, you get Exiles, song that had been around for a few years. I guess they played bits and pieces of it live all the way back, going back to 1969. But this album gets my highest score because of side two, man. It starts out with Easy Money, which is just such a cool groove. And then it goes into Talking Drum, which like takes forever to get going with those wild jungle drums. But once it does, it's just a total freak out, and it builds and it builds and it builds for 7 minutes. And then all that crazy violin stuff going on in your brain. And then Larks, Tongues In Aspic Part 2. Oh man, one of my favorite pieces of music ever. I guess there was a softcore porn movie called Emmanuel that used this song originally. Robert Fripp took him to court to take that out of the movie. You know how Robert Fripp is about controlling the rights to his music. He wasn't about to have a softcore porn movie have his song on it. But I remember when I was watching Skinamax late night one night, I'm like, what? What in the world? What is that song doing in here? Anyway, yeah, this is a perfect album in every single respect. It's expansive, it's experimental, it's improvisational, it rocks hard when it needs to, it gets mellow when it needs to, it introduces a lot of different soundscapes and a lot of different Eastern scales and all kinds of different stuff you hear on this thing. The craziness of Jamie Muir's percussion. David Cross's violin just going nuts. Both Robert Fripp and David Cross play mellotron on here, so they didn't forget about the mellotron. Even though the flutes and the saxophones are gone, replaced by the violin, this album here is the one that I continually return to over and over. I just love it. Happy 50th birthday, Larks, Tongues In Aspic. You've been a big part of my life for a long, long time. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out to one of my favorite records ever, and obviously my favorite King Crimson album ever. Anyway, happy birthday, Larks, Tongues In Aspic. What a great album. And I will see you guys tomorrow with an album review. What? Anyway, I'll see you freaks on the flip-flop. Peace.